One thing that stuck out with me being a St. Louis fan was how Jack Buck was so inspirational, and talk about purposeful movement with you and how he was able to help you. Can you describe that for our listeners and really take us back to that moment of how impactful that man was in your life?
And honestly, in the amount of time we have, the answer to your question is no, I can't, because words don't really do it justice. I was talking to a dear friend last night. We had a drive from Nashville back up to St. Louis. We had several meetings socially distanced down to Nashville, and then did a couple of recordings in some theaters down there, and then drove back home late last night. And we were just talking about influences in our life that changed us. And he talked about his grandparents. I talked about my parents. He talked about one of his teachers. And then I talked about Jack Buck. So we carried ourselves through 5 hours of this late night driving, talking about people who positively influenced our life for the good. And for me, one of them was a guy named Jack. And I recognize, Brian, some of your listeners may not know that name. They may not be from our community, or they may be a little bit younger than you and I. And so Jack Buck was the broadcaster for the Cardinals in the late 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and until 2002 when he passed away. And he was my hero. Anyone who grew up within reach of 1120 KMOX, Jack Buck was your guy, because he was bringing into living color the St. Louis Cardinals during a time when you weren't watching live very frequently, or on the internet ever, or on TV frequently. So Jack was the guy, and I got burned on a Saturday in January. And the following day, I'm tied down into a hospital bed. Can't move my arms or my legs. My eyes are swollen shut, and I got a trach, which means I can't breathe. I also can't eat or drink, and I can't talk. So I'm completely cut off from the world. But I could dream and hope and pray, and I could listen. Whose voice besides maybe your mom and dad's would you rather hear in this community than Jack Buck's? And he comes into my world that day for the first time. I'd never met him live before that day. He had been told by a family member that a little boy was going to die. And rather than just say, oh, it's too bad, the following day he shows up in a stranger's life, walks into the scary room. A burn center is a difficult place to visit, sits down next to me, a stranger, and says, "Kid, wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. See you soon." And then he leaves. He's told by the staff that there's no chance. And you talked a moment ago about purposeful action, purposeful movement. The following day, even though he's told previously that the kid's not going to survive, and now by the staff, in quotes, the experts, that the little boy's not going to survive, the following day into that headwind, he shows back up into a stranger's life, walks back into the darkness and says, "Kid, wake up. You are going to live. You're going to survive. Keep fighting." And Brian, if the story ends there, it's like, wow, what a guy. But he comes back the following day and the following day and the following day for the 5 months I'm in hospital, and lives into the promise of John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. It's one thing to say, "Hey, Brian, we should get together sometime." And then 11 years later, it's like, yeah, we should get together sometime. And you never do the things you say you're going to do. That's so common in our lives because we're busy, and also we're really important. We're just all really busy, important people.
So true.
So is Jack. Okay, like I want to make sure he's not retired. He's not bored. He's highly busy, but also highly focused on what matters. And so again and again over 5 months, he keeps visiting me. And then we have, I think the date is July 26th against the Pittsburgh Pirates. We have John O'Leary Day at the ballpark, this celebration of victory, not individual victory, collective victory.
Wow. I mean, you hear so oftentimes the bad stories with celebrities or people in the spotlight. I think hearing stories like that with prominent figures in the community that are held out at higher standards, it's amazing to me, that story and how he impacted you and had John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. I mean, it's a kid's dream to do that.
It is, and it was. And one more thing I'll layer into that is, and he, for some reason, did not even post on it on Instagram or Facebook. He did not tweet out, "Look at me." Most celebrities are doing a lot of good work, and the very first person you see in the great work they're doing is themselves. Jack didn't talk about it. He didn't write about it. There's 2 autobiographies he wrote. In one of them, he whispers out, There's a kid as gutsy as anybody I've ever met named John O'Leary. I was lucky to do some good with him. That's what he says. He doesn't talk about the visits. He doesn't talk about the baseballs. He doesn't talk about the decade and a half of mentorship. He almost talks about like, wow, aren't I lucky to have been blessed to be part of John's life? So he refuses to take credit and refused to brag about it when he was doing it. So it's just so countercultural and so attractive.